everybody. It is Wednesday, September 4th. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, a happy National Wildlife Day to you.
Thank you, Moshe, and same to you. Sounds like a wonderful day to take a walk outside.
Yeah, enjoy nature. That's been our theme this week. It's actually set up to bring awareness to endangered animals, but in general, there are many ways to do that. Obviously, you can donate to various organizations, conservation organizations, or just, embrace Mother Nature at some point today.
We only have one planet, at least for now.
There you go. That small little blue speck in the solar system. As we've told you recently, Mars apparently had life like 3 billion years ago, and then something happened. So this is it for us, folks. So take care of it.
All right, Moshe, here are the headlines. 2.5 years into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the fighting is intensifying. Where things stand after Russia launches the deadliest attack of the year. Meanwhile, Mongolia ignoring an international warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin's arrest and instead giving him a red carpet welcome.
Yeah, we've told you the International Criminal Court doesn't have much power, and the latest example of that yesterday.
Back here at home, believe it or not, we are just 1 week until the presidential debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris.
If it happens, Jill, we think it's going to happen. We think it's going to happen.
But on the political front, we're going to take a look at the massive gender gap this election cycle.
Yeah, they're calling it the girl versus boy election on multiple levels.
Speaking of the election, a new report shows that an online network linked to China is trying to stoke political divisions. And it comes as a former aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul is accused of being a Chinese spy. Again, overseas, 2 U.S. Marines have been attacked in Turkey by a nationalist youth movement, what we know about the attack. And Moshe, let's talk about the Paralympics, where the world's second tallest man was forced to sleep while waiting to compete.
It turns out he's just over 8 feet tall, Jill, and they didn't have accommodations.
And hundreds of Game of Thrones props are now up for auction. We're talking everything from Jon Snow's sword to the prosthetic teeth used by the White Walkers. And Moshe has on this day in history.
Jill, we celebrate a big birthday for an American city that was once named the town of Our Lady, the Queen of the Angels of Porciuncula. It has a shorter name today that's much more memorable.
All right, Moshe, I think I know it, but I shall wait like everybody else until the end of the podcast. Okay, let's start with the latest in Ukraine with the war's deadliest single attack this year. At least 50 people were killed and 271 injured when Russia hit a military institute in Ukraine's central town of Poltava with 2 ballistic missiles Tuesday. It is thought that about 15 people are still buried under rubble. And it's not clear how many of the victims were from the armed forces, but the attack was a major blow to Kyiv as it's been trying to bolster its ranks to hold off a more powerful army in Russia. The strike happened while classes were in session. According to video and pictures posted on social media, you could see several bodies of young men on the ground just covered in dust and debris. The building was badly damaged. Ukrainian President Zelensky saying on Telegram, quote, "The Russian scum will definitely be held accountable for this strike." He ordered a full investigation. Ukraine's foreign ministry saying that the use of ballistic missiles, which are able to hit targets hundreds of miles away within just a few minutes of launching, means that the victims had very little time to find cover after the air raid siren sounded. In fact, Zelensky did an interview with NBC's Richard Engel, and he said that there were people killed while they were running into bomb shelters. Ukraine's first lady writing on Twitter or X, quote, "This is a stunning tragedy for all of Ukraine. The enemy hit an educational institution and a hospital."
It comes now 2.5 years into this war. The fighting has only intensified in the last month. Of course, we've been talking about what's going on in eastern Ukraine. We've been talking about also Ukraine making that surprise invasion into Russia and taking some territory there as part of their strategy. Russia has been intensifying its missile and drone attacks on Ukraine. Last week, Ukraine was pummeled with the heaviest bombardment to date. And on Monday, ballistic and cruise missiles targeted the capital of Kyiv. Ukraine is returning fire, targeting Russia with more than 150 drones over the weekend, damaging an oil refinery near Moscow, a power station, mounting their first large-scale cross-border assault into Russia in recent weeks. Zelensky is calling for more Western air defenses. There's also talk about increased weaponry that the Russians are now getting from the Iranians. They've also been getting weapons from the North Koreans as well. Zelensky's saying he needs more help from allies, long-range weapons to strike deeper into Russian territory. It's something we've talked about on the podcast. Ukraine is looking for more aid here. They're dependent on Western aid to keep this going. As far as the Westerners are concerned, they view this as an opportunity to deplete Russia and prevent Russia from destroying Ukraine, taking over Ukraine, and then moving on to the rest of Europe. So basically, Ukraine serving as the battle line here. So NATO troops, U.S. troops don't need to get involved in this war. But Ukraine is also getting a lot of those weapons with restrictions, getting limits put on it by the U.S. saying, hey, we're going to give you this missile, but you can only use it for this or only use it for that. And ultimately here, Zelensky's like, please take off the shackles. To a certain extent, he's done that on his own with that invasion of Russia. It's not clear that he had U.S. or Western permission to go ahead and do that, though they're like, yeah, totally. That seems like a good plan now that he's taken some territory there. It comes as they're still struggling inside Ukraine. The Ukrainian minister in charge of weapons production resigned on Tuesday. You also had 4 other ministers stand down as a major government shakeup happens. Remember, we're 2.5 years into the war here. And so ultimately, as they're not able to achieve certain objectives, or there's been allegations of corruption, etc., Zelensky has been moving around some folks in his senior leadership team.
Right. And I mentioned President Zelensky sat down with NBC's Richard Engel. He choked up reacting to that attack that we mentioned at the top of the podcast on the military compound. Engel, though, did this broad-ranging interview with Zelensky, and he asked about this overall strategy and what's next now that Ukraine has essentially flipped the script and started to take Russian territory. Zelensky said Ukraine doesn't want Russian territory. They don't want Russian soldiers, but they do need it as a way to get their own personnel and territory back.
Yeah, ultimately, it's effectively been a standstill on the Eastern Front, about 600-mile Eastern Front there. Russia controls about 20% of Ukraine, and the fighting over the last year has literally been, a couple hundred feet here, a couple hundred meters there, not much movement. So Ukraine tried to shake things up there by taking Russian territory, hoping to create some leverage for themselves as they hope to, at some point, negotiate with Putin to get back their country. And so they figured, let's take some of yours so we can at least do a handoff here. Meanwhile, speaking of Russia and Putin, he received a red carpet welcome in his neighboring country of Mongolia yesterday. It's notable only for the fact that Mongolia is a member of the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court has issued a warrant for Putin's arrest for various war crimes. They issued it last year. And officially, if you're a country that's a member of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, you're obligated to act on those warrants. So if there's a warrant out for their arrest and you're an ICC member, you need to arrest them. Well, Mongolia did not do that. Mongolia is only transitioned to democracy recently. They're on Russia's border. They're dependent for a variety of reasons on Russia. And so ultimately, instead of an arrest, they gave him a red carpet welcome.
Okay, now to 2024 politics here at home, where we are already approaching crunch time post-Labor Day. Moshe, I feel like we have been in this election cycle for like 5 years.
And what's wild in this modern era, Jill, is like typically crunch time is like late October, but with early voting in so many states, absentee ballots, crunch time is now.
So we are actually less than a week out from the first debate. It's next Tuesday, and early voting and as you just mentioned, early voting and absentee ballots are starting to be sent out in some states. One of the major stories that we're watching this cycle is the growing gender gap. Women have typically voted more Democratic and men more Republican in recent decades. But this year, we're seeing a gender chasm unlike anything that we have seen before, and especially among young voters. We're talking people ages 18 to 29 years old.
The Gen Zers are very split.
So at a time of this huge gender gap in politics among young people, women leaning left, men leaning right, the Trump campaign has been aggressively courting what might be called the bro vote or the Zin vote, whatever you like it. Zin, by the way, I believe is like those nicotine patches. Moshe.
Yeah, very big among young men.
But the problem here for the Trump team, 18 to 29-year-old men have long been regarded as unreliable and unreachable by politicians. Still, Republicans believe that they might just swing the election this year. Trump and his allies have been exploring deep into the universe of social media stars with male-centric audiences. Think the Nelk Boys, Dana White and UFC, Dave Portnoy and his Barstool Sports Media Network, YouTubers like Jake and Logan Paul, podcasters like Theo Von, and streamers like Aiden Ross. Every 4 years, campaigns and political analysts slice the electorate into tiny subgroups that they believe could swing the vote. And so you might remember soccer moms always being a huge constituency, also suburban mothers in Michigan, retirees in Arizona, Latinos in Nevada, Black voters in Georgia. The list goes on. But the gender gap is a mega trend spanning across swing states and racial groups, and it is most prominent, once again, among young voters. In a series of New York Times Santa College polls in 6 swing states this month, young men favored Trump by 13 points, while young women favored Harris by 38 points, a 51-point gap.
Yeah, 51-point gap there among the Gen Zers. I can't imagine that's playing well among dating right now. If you're young and out there this election cycle.
Especially given, Moshe, that a lot of young people say that they won't date someone who has a different political view than they do.
Yeah, and while we've always seen, as you mentioned, a gender gap, it's typically been like 12 points, 8 points, slight advantage for Democrats among women, slight advantage for Republicans among men in sort of blowout elections in recent cycles. That's not apparent, but that's sort of been the trend line now for a few decades here. But we're seeing a divide unlike anything we've seen, even much more than 2016. Women much more in Harris's basket than Hillary Clinton's basket back than 8 years ago, and men even moving more towards Donald Trump here. The question, as you brought up, is whether Trump can actually get young men to the ballot box. The survey shows that about a third of young men who say they plan to vote for Trump didn't actually show up in 2020. So it's unclear whether they'll show up this time around. Also, as we know, young voters less likely to show up than older voters. Of the young men who do show up to vote, the youngest of them, the first-time voters, seem more likely to vote for Trump. And what's notable here, Jill, is if you think about it, now that this is the third straight election Trump is running, he first sort of came on the political scene in 2015. For many of these young men who are 18 to 29, they first learned of Trump back when they were in middle school. So they haven't really known American politics without Donald Trump. And so they see him in a sense that he, is fighting for men, machismo. They feel like they're constantly being told that they're in the wrong, that they need to be apologizing for who they are. That's among the things you hear from a lot of young men. And what's interesting in the outreach that you've seen by the Trump campaign here is they're reaching out to non-traditional media. So you mentioned the Nelk Boys, which are huge in engagement. They opened up their recent interview with J.D. Vance by announcing a $20 million voter registration drive for young men. For those of you unfamiliar, the Nelk Boys, a group of young men who started doing prank videos talking about sports, and now they've gotten into more right-wing politics. There's also Aiden Ross, who you mentioned. He's a gaming streamer. People watch him play video games. He recently did a live from Mar-a-Lago for millions of people. He's only 23 years old, and that was actually set up by his campaign, saying this is going to be big for us among young men. This is the constituency that we've known for years that Barstool Sports has discovered. They've typically been talking sports. Now they're talking politics. You see videos by Dave Portnoy and others on social media. Remember, Dave Portnoy did a major interview with Trump back at the White House a couple years ago that had some mainstream media outlets being like, whoa, Barstool's getting the interview with the president right now? So, you've seen this transition here where this next gen of younger men, right-leaning men, they're not really watching Hannity and Tucker Carlson as much. They're looking to these more non-traditional media that didn't come to them first through sports, that didn't come to them first through politics, but is now talking to politics. It is remarkable. We put up a chart on the Instagram account looking at the gender gap across generations. Just that wide chasm among 18 to 29-year-olds, pretty remarkable. And Jill, when we talk about young voters, it's transition, right? The millennials were the young voters not too long ago. And back in 2008, 2012, young men, young women basically evenly voted for Barack Obama at that time. But over the last decade, we've seen this gender gap open up among young voters. And this is a big issue because Democrats rely on young voters. They typically rely on them at about 60% and need about 60% of young voters to vote their way for them to swing national elections. And so, for example, if enough young men actually show up or don't show up at all, either way, if they show up for Trump or they don't show up at all, and Democrats are only getting about 55% of the young vote per se, that could be an issue for Democrats this fall. What's interesting, Time story about this in the last day, Jill, mentioned that part of the hope Democrats have is Tim Walz. The thought is he's a former high school football coach. They had his former players on stage at the DNC. Unclear whether that's really going to help them. Tim Walz versus the Nelk boys, Aiden Ross and Barstool Sports might be an uphill climb there for Democrats. But still, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And to the initial point, we've brought up a couple of points. And to the initial point we've both brought up, will young men actually show up to vote in November? I've heard from a couple of you who have both young daughters and young sons. And you're like, my daughter's definitely voting. I don't know about my son. Again, that's anecdotal, but we'll see.
One thing that I noticed that has seemed quite intentional on the part of the Harris campaign is that they call Tim Walz Coach Walz. Yeah. It does not sound like that's what he went as governor. It doesn't seem like anyone called him that since he was actually a coach. Exactly. Yeah. And so the fact that that's the way that Kamala Harris introduces him, certainly noticeable. My father is a longtime basketball coach on Long Island, but he still coaches, and that's just what everyone calls him. And so to me, it is a term of endearment. I mean, everywhere he goes, people are like, coach, coach, coach. Yeah. And it is one of those things that I do think people can relate to. But again, it does not seem like Tim Walz had been referred to as coach for many years.
What's notable, Jill, for the voters they're going for, these young men, Coach Walz has not been a coach since most of them have been alive.
Exactly. Time for the speed read from Axios. A warning to everyone on social media about political content that you're seeing. Americans are reportedly being inundated by media manipulated by China, Russia, and Iran in recent years. They're trying to deepen divisions as the election approaches. According to a new report, a Chinese influence operation of inauthentic social media accounts trying to spread anti-Western sentiment is using fake accounts posing as American citizens ahead of the 2024 election. The Chinese state-linked disinformation campaign, it's known as Spamiflage, and they've been using increasingly aggressive tactics as they try to influence American online discourse. This is according to the intelligence company Graphica. So some of the most recent political content was almost certainly AI generated, according to the report. Graphica has been monitoring the operation's use of fake and hijacked accounts since 2019. And since last year, those efforts have only deepened, with Spamiflage pages amplifying content that's criticizing candidates, casting doubt on the electoral process, and delving into sensitive issues like gun control and the Israel-Hamas war. Graphica identified 15 accounts on X and one on TikTok claiming to be Americans or U.S.-focused activists, as well as one cross-platform persona posing as an inauthentic media outlet.
Yeah, the key thing here, and we've mentioned this before, is it's not necessarily that they have a dog in the fight. They just want their dog in the fight is creating chaos in American democracy and, effectively getting us to fight with ourselves. At least 5 accounts Graphica observed explicitly claiming to be American voters, soldiers, or someone who loves America but has grown disappointed with the U.S. government and the Biden administration. There was a cross-platform account called the Harlan Report, purporting to be a U.S. conservative media outlet that was actually getting a lot of views online, and it was found to be Spamiflage coming from abroad. Apparently, the account shifted personas multiple times on X as a New York-based veteran critical of Biden, as a young male Trump supporter with an AI-generated profile picture. There was also and then it shifted to becoming a Republican influencer based in Florida. It led TikTok. It has led Twitter to suspend the Harlan Report. It led TikTok to ban the Harlan Report. And so you're seeing this over and over again, particularly from China, where China's sort of thinking Harris won't be great for us. Neither will Trump. Let's just, use this time to mess with Americans and get them to hate on each other and fight with each other. And so this new report finds that Spamouflage's attempt to pose as U.S. users is more expansive than previously reported. And so ultimately, while in recent years they didn't have that much influence, increasingly as they get better here, they are finding that some of these accounts are getting millions of views, and that is particularly concerning to the social media platforms as well as the U.S. government.
Scott Galloway talks about this all the time, particularly in terms of China, saying, look, they're not going to be able to beat us militarily per se. So this is a relatively cheap and easy way to beat the United States, make particularly young people feel bad about the country and not be patriotic.
Yeah, and they're succeeding.
And sticking with China, from CNBC, a former top aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul was arrested Tuesday on federal criminal charges, accusing her of acting as an undisclosed agent of China and the Chinese Communist Party and of laundering millions of dollars for China. Linda Sun had been deputy chief of staff to Kathy Hochul for a year. In addition to holding other state government positions, she's charged with violating and conspiring to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act, visa fraud, alien smuggling, and money laundering conspiracy. Sun's husband also arrested on charges of money laundering conspiracy, as well as conspiracy to commit bank fraud and misuse of means of identification. The couple were arrested by FBI agents at their home on Long Island.
What's going on out there?
Nothing good. They appeared in federal court on Tuesday, where they both pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors say the couple laundered the proceeds of their alleged scheme to buy a $4.1 million home in Manhasset, that's on Long Island, and then a $2.1 million condominium in Honolulu, and luxury cars, including a 2024 Ferrari.
Yeah, you probably aren't even trying to hide it at that point. You're a state government official with a Ferrari condo in Honolulu and a $4 million house in Long Island.
Moshe, isn't the rule of spying to kind of go like undercover and be modest?
Yeah, well, they don't seem like very good spies, Jill. I mean, they made it a few years here. But I will say, by the way, speaking of Long Island, the Eastern District of New York has been busy lately with a number of indictments. So that's where they went to federal court on Tuesday. The indictment unsealed found that Sun, while working for the governor's office under Governor Andrew Cuomo, as well as Kathy Hochul, and in multiple agencies, was doing work on behalf of the Chinese government, pushing the Chinese Communist agenda. Among the things she did, she blocked representatives from Taiwan from having access to the New York governor's office. She changed Hochul's and another politician's messaging regarding China and the Communist Party. She obtained official proclamations from the governor for Chinese representatives. And she actually tried to organize a trip for Hochul to China. She apparently also organized meetings for delegations from China, meeting with New York state officials. And in return for all of this, she received substantial economic and other benefits. The money for the Ferrari and the condo in Honolulu, etc. Sun was working for the state labor department at the time she was fired. Over the course of the past decade, she's held a number of positions in New York state government, including deputy chief of staff to Hochul for about a year. Now, Hochul's press secretary says that she was fired in March of 2023, so last March, after they discovered evidence of misconduct, immediately reported her to law enforcement, and they've been assisting law enforcement throughout this process. So clearly, the governor's office here, she was doing enough suspicious stuff where they're like, yeah, something doesn't add up here, leading them to fire her, and ultimately, it appears, get her arrested.
From the Washington Post, 2 U.S. Marines were assaulted in Turkey on Monday by more than a dozen members of a Turkish nationalist group. According to authorities, 13 men and 2 women were detained after being accused of attacking the service members. They are accused of membership in the Turkish Youth Union. That is a group that opposes U.S. and European Union influence in Turkey. The assault took place Monday afternoon in western Turkey. The service members were from the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit, were in civilian clothing. Local police did intervene, and other Marines in the area helped the 2 members who were attacked. The Turkish Youth Union posted a video of the attack on social media. It showed a group pushing 2 men and covering one of their heads in what appeared to be a white sack as they were chanting in English, "Yankee, go home." And in that post on social media, they wrote, U.S. soldiers who carry the blood of our soldiers and thousands of Palestinians on their hands cannot defile our country.
The spokesperson for the U.S. 6th Fleet, Commander Tim Gorman, said in an email that 2 Marines were taken to a hospital as a precaution, but they were not injured and returned to their ship. It's the USS Wasp. It was docked in Izmir on Sunday after conducting training with Turkish naval forces. A reminder, Turkey is a NATO country, but increasingly has been looking the other direction, and especially among the population, the U.S. has become very unpopular in Turkey. And this is not the first one of these incidents that we've seen. Back in 2014, about 20 people that were members of that Turkish youth union attacked 3 U.S. sailors in Istanbul. In 2016, 2 members of the group were detained after putting a sack over the head of a different U.S. soldier. And apparently the whole idea of putting sacks over the heads of U.S. soldiers, this goes back to 2003. That's when U.S. troops in Iraq at the time had detained a few Turkish Special Forces soldiers, had put covers on their heads. So effectively, they've now adopted this as their own tactic as revenge.
From CBS News, the world's second largest man is representing Iran at the Paralympics in Paris. But he is so tall that he needs to sleep on the floor. Morteza Mirzad Selejani, who is better known as Mirzad, is the star player of Iran's sitting volleyball team. The 2-time Paralympic champion is 8 feet 1 inches. His stature means that he has been sleeping on the floor in Paris. The team's head coach telling Olympics.com that his star player didn't get a custom bed like he did at the Tokyo Games, but that he doesn't mind sleeping on the floor. He says, quote, he doesn't have a special bed, but he has got the most important aim in his mind. It doesn't matter for him whether he'll lay on the floor or he's not going to have enough to eat. In any way, he has the mind to become a champion.
Yeah, so Iran apparently big on the sitting volleyball circuit. They've won 7 of 9 sitting volleyball Olympic tournaments since the 1988 games. We should note Mirzad, he's 36 years old. He was diagnosed at a young age with acromegaly. It is a rare hormonal disorder that causes excess in parts of the body. So one of his legs is taller than the other leg by about 6 inches. And then he had a bicycle accident as a teenager that injured his pelvis. So he competes in the Paralympic Games here. Sitting volleyball, similar principles to regular volleyball. But the player's back or butt must always stay in contact with the floor. And they slide into position using their hands and arms. What's notable, given how tall this guy is at 8'1", is that even sitting down, he still measures 6 feet tall with his arms raised when he's sitting on the ground. And at the peak of his fingertips.
Wait, sitting on the ground?
Sitting on the ground, and he puts his arms up.
Oh my God.
He's 6 feet. Like, he's still taller than me or you, Jill, sitting down with his arms up. And apparently, at the peak of his fingertips, he can block shots at more than 7 feet. He apparently can spike at 7'5", sitting on the ground.
Wow. That's all I could say.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, it's got to be difficult dealing with his condition and his height generally in society, but in sitting volleyball, he crushes it.
From Time, fans of Game of Thrones can now bid on a slew of costumes, props, set pieces, and memorabilia from the hit HBO show that ended back in 2019. More than 2,000 items will be on the auction block in October through Heritage Auctions, and this includes a melted version of the coveted Iron Throne, Jaime Lannister's full suit of armor and sword, and the prosthetic teeth used for the White Walkers. Starting bids range anywhere from $500 to $20,000. Other notable items include Daenerys Targaryen's memorable cloaks, coats, and leather ensembles, some that feature dragon chokers and accents, Jon Snow's notorious Longclaw sword, and the Hand of the Queen pin worn by Tyrion Lannister. Even items that didn't get a lot of screen time, like some of the blood-stained clothing from the infamous Red Wedding, are expected to get a lot of attention from fans during bidding.
Yeah, so the auction is set to take place between October 10th and 12th. As you mentioned, through Heritage Auctions in Dallas. Preliminary bidding is already happening, so go check that out over at Heritage Auctions if you want to grab a piece of history. Game of Thrones, very zeitgeisty. Jill, admission, I never watched Game of Thrones. I know I need to get to it at some point. And so I appreciate you taking the portion of the story here that included the pronunciation of all those names.
They are not easy, Moshe, if you have not seen the show, and especially after you and I admitted on yesterday's podcast that we do sometimes mess up pronunciations. But Moshe, it is not very often that I have seen something that you haven't.
It's
true. All I could say is put this on your list. There is Game of Thrones. There's a reason it is the classic.
I know. I agree with you. I understand that. It took a lot for me to admit that, Jill. I don't like to admit when I don't know something, generally speaking, but here I am. Anyway, HBO apparently preserves all the stuff from the shows these days and offers it up to auction. So Game of Thrones fans, get out there and go bid on your favorite item from the show. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in 1781 with our clue today. A group of 44 settlers of European, African, and Native American backgrounds travel from northern Mexico to establish a small farming village on the banks of a river off of the Pacific Ocean. The Spanish governor names the settlement the town of Our Lady, the Queen of the Angels of Porciuncula, or, as we know it today, Los Angeles. Happy birthday, LA. I'm told traffic wasn't so bad back in 1781.
Those horses, they really get in each other's way.
The 405 back in 1781 was really packed by those 44 settlers. By the way, we should note LA has had humans living in it, that area, going back thousands of years of natives, but this is the formal settlement of LA in modern times. All right, on this day in 1951, President Truman makes the first national TV broadcast from coast to coast on this day in 1951. It was a speech from San Francisco about a post-war treaty with Japan from World War II at the time. But a big deal in 1951 was the first time a president could actually give a speech seen by the whole country. Staying with TV here for a second, on this day in 1972, there had been a previous version of Price is Right. It had been canceled, and they decided to bring it back, this time with a guy named Bob Barker. It's the same version we see today, premiering on this day in 1972. Also on this day in 1972, a little Olympic history, U.S. swimmer Mark Spitz, one of the all-time greats, became the first athlete to win 7 gold medals during a single Olympic Games. Happy birthday to Google, turning 26 years old today. Google was formally established by founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page, filing incorporation papers on this day. All right, and on this day in 2016, Mother Teresa was canonized by Pope Francis. She had passed away back in 1997, but they canonized her about 20 years later. All right, and we end here with a bit of music history. Turning 25 today, Bailamos. Enrique Iglesias goes to number 1 on the charts with his hit on this day in 1999. If you were watching American Idol on this day, you probably were. It was the first season. It was a big deal. Kelly Clarkson became the first winner on this day in 2002. A Moment Like This was her debut single from the show. Do you remember who she beat out, Jill?
Moshe, I forget his name, but I remember that they did a very cheesy movie after it that I, for some reason, decided to watch some of. What is his name? Do you remember?
Justin Guarini.
Yes. Kelly Clarkson is one of the biggest success stories because, of course, that show has gone on to numerous seasons, but she has really made a name for herself. She's really made a name for herself and currently has a talk show.
She's got a talk show that she sings on.
And does great covers.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned, she is forever a reference in what movie? The 40-Year-Old Virgin. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Yes, please leave us some great reviews. Jill, I should note, I actually cracked up reading the most recent reviews recently. We got a whole bunch of 5-star reviews. We're like a 4.9, but there's always like some haters out there. And we have 2 recent 1-star reviews, and it's like perfect because one of them is, this show has gotten so liberal, I can't handle it, 1 star. And then the next one, that's a 1-star review, is saying they're apologists for Donald Trump and they're clearly pro-Trump. And I was like, the 2 of you both gave us 1-star reviews within a day of each other, and these are the conclusions you came to. Anyway, I know these are precarious political times, but anyway, it made me laugh a bit to see that the 2 opposite conclusions led 2 different people to 1-star reviews.
We should take a screenshot of that because I think it's a compliment. I do. I don't love a 1-star review, but
I don't love a 1-star review, but I like a 1-star review if like the two of them are like, you're so pro Harris, well, you're so pro Trump. And it's like, all right, yeah. Well, both of you should probably, I can suggest podcasts that probably work better given how worked up you are right now.
All right, everybody, breathe. It's Happy Nature Day. Enjoy, Go for a walk, all that. All right, have a great day.